In this video, we're going to see how you can use the rules engine to automate many of your processes and ensure process compliance within Springboard. The rules engine can be built on any of your jobs or baked into the processes that run those jobs. The easiest way to get started with the rules engine is to click into any job. You'll see on the left-hand side here folders that are marked in green. Green folders mean that a rule is active on those folders. A rule simply means something that will run in the background and automatically process your candidates based on the rules that you define when creating that rule. Let's have a look at one to make more sense. To access rules, right-click on a folder and choose either Create Rule or View Rules. I'm going to click Create Rule. When creating a rule, you're taken through a four-step wizard that will set up the definition of that rule, and you can set this up on your own at any time. Here we're creating a rule against a specific job, and it will process only for candidates that are on that job. However, you can create a rule against processes that are then baked onto a job, and I'll show you that at the second half of this video. The first step when creating a rule is to define when a rule will execute. And you can choose from several different options depending on your site configuration and from where you're creating the rule. The two most common when steps will be on entry or on send email. On entry means that when a candidate enters this particular folder, in this example screening, the rule will be evaluated. Because screening is the first step of the process, this basically means when a candidate applies to this job, this rule could be evaluated because they're entering the first step. If you created the rule on a later step in the process, the rule will be evaluated when they enter that step, for example interviewing or reference check. On send email refers to when you send an email to the candidate. So when you send an email, this rule could be evaluated. Other less common when conditions could be when hiring manager feedback is submitted or a form is submitted. Good examples of on-entry rules are when you want to consider moving a candidate around the system based on criteria about that candidate. For example, when they apply, if they do not have rights to work in this country, you can automatically move them to unsuccessful. A good example of an on-send email rule is when sending an email, move that candidate automatically on to the next step in the process. You may choose to set up an on feedback submitted rule when hiring managers submit a yes or a no decision about your candidate, move them automatically to the next step in the process. When a form is submitted, you could move them to another step in the process, send them an email, or trigger a chain of forms to be generated by generating the next form in the chain once one form is submitted. Job Ad Archived is a good example of emailing candidates when a job has been closed. Let's choose on entry for this step. On clicking next, you get to define the conditions for when this rule will execute, and you can add them from this drop down here. The options that are available will be dependent upon the configuration of your site. For example, I could choose a condition of legal work status. When the legal work status is equal to Australian citizen, Australian resident, working holiday visa, 457. If I choose all of these options, then the rule will fire when any candidate applies to this to this process. With these conditions, the rule will fire. Or in fact, if I would change this to not equals to, now the rule will execute whenever a candidate does not have rights to work in the country or the correct work permits. The above step is required, and typically you're best to just tick Recruiter and Rules Engine, and it basically means that the rule will fire regardless of whether you, the recruiter, manually move the candidate into this step or the Rules Engine moves the candidate into this step based on a previous rule firing. Once you've defined when a rule will fire and the conditions under which it should be applied for this particular candidate, the next step is to define what will happen when all of these conditions are met. In this example, we've chosen to execute a rule on candidates who do not have work rights in this country, and we want to choose an action from the list here. Let's say that we will change their status and we'll move them to reject with a reject reason with no rights to work in Australia. I could choose to add a second action if I wished, a send email, and I could automatically send them a reject email as part of this rule. Click next, give the rule a name, optionally a description. You can review the rule summary. It will fire on entry, apply them when the recruiter moves or the rules engine moves the candidate and the legal work status is not equal to one of these, and when those conditions are met, we are going to reject the candidate and send them an email. Create rule. Now I can see this new rule associated with my job and it's active. We're now looking at the same workflow, but we're in the rules engine mode here. So if I click up on all, instead of seeing all my candidates, I actually see all the rules that have been created for this particular job. I can add a new rule down here, or simply close out. Next, let's take a look at just a couple of other examples that you could do with the rules engine. The first I'm going to do is automatically move people to the reject folder when you send an email. For this one, I'm going to start by saying that the email will be triggered when I send an email, and then I'm going to add some conditions. First of all, I'm going to select which email template this rule should fire on when being sent. I'm going to choose the reject email. So this action will fire when a reject email is sent to a candidate. I can choose additional filters here. So for example, a filter of unsuccessful candidate contact is equal to not contacted only. So I don't want to perform this action if I've verbally contacted this candidate, or already sent an email to this candidate. Click next, add an action, change the status, and I'm going to change the status to reject. The reason, reject email has been sent. So in this example, this rule will automatically move someone to the reject folder whenever you choose to send an email to the candidate telling them that they've been rejected. If I close that out to create one more example of a rule, this time on the screening folder. So when a candidate first enters the screening folder, I'm actually going to target my rule very specifically on a particular response that a user or a candidate has given to a questionnaire. So I select questionnaire response, and in this particular example, I'm only asking a single question for candidates who apply to this job. Please select your preference location. And when their preferred location is equal to Sydney, I'm going to automatically move them, change them to a new status. Pardon me. I'm automatically going to link them to a new requisition, which is the Civil Engineering Sydney folder. Move Sydney. So in this example, I'm moving any candidates who have marked a preference for working in Sydney from the pool rec automatically to the Sydney rec. And you can see, using this example, an idea of using workforce distribution or job distribution automatically using the rules engine. So there's just a couple of examples of ways that you can use the rules engine successfully, and of course there are many others. We recommend you have a look through the available options within the rules engine, or contact application support if you have some automation in mind and you're looking for some guidance on how to achieve it. Now we'll move, so far I've shown you how to create rules specifically on a particular job. Whilst this can save you time, if you had to create the same rules every time you posted a job, it wouldn't save you much. It wouldn't save you as much time, and there'd be no consistency across your process. With Springboard, you can set up a template set of rules once against your workflow, and those rules will be automatically stamped against every job you create. To do this, go to Administration, Process Designer. This will give you a list of all the processes that have been set up within your system. If I click the standard as an example, you can see that here is the standard list of workflow steps that are available on this process. And if I click Manage Rules, I'm now creating rules against this workflow. You can see there are 3 standard rules set up for this workflow. One to automatically create phone screens, another to automatically create reference details or reference checks, and another to send out an onboarding new starter form at the appropriate points. Every time that the standard workflow is associated with this particular, with a new job, these 3 rules will automatically be stamped against that job. Over time, if you make changes to the design of your workflow and add new rules or modify rules, you can use the option up here, Sync Rules to Existing Jobs, to force those changes out to all the existing jobs that you have running at the moment. That concludes a walkthrough of the rules engine in Springboard to manage automation of your process and also ensure process consistency. If you have further questions on this, please contact application support.